I was going to start by introducing myself, but actually I've had a wonderful introduction from Anna, so thank you very much. But it's worth saying that my primary job at UTS is actually in teaching clinical psychology, uh, and my development of my teaching and research in mindfulness actually developed as a sort of sideline, but I'm very lucky now it's integrated into my main job in terms of research into mindfulness-integrated therapies and the use of mindfulness in pain, particularly, that I'm interested in. I've been involved in the MICBT Institute for now coming up to 15 years. I didn't quite realize until I counted last night. So a long time, and I've been involved in training in mindfulness. I've attended a number of different 10-day silent retreats, and more recently I've been involved in training in teaching yoga as a way of really applying meditation in a moving format. So I'm interested in yoga and meditation from the perspective of pain reduction and distress reduction. So there's a whole lot of very interesting stuff out there that I've been very lucky to be involved in, and hopefully tell you a little bit about it today. Okay, so I wanted to start off with a sort of general introduction to mindfulness. Mindfulness has become incredibly popular, as you all know, over the last decade. You've all have heard of it. You've all have come across it in various ways. But as a result of this sort of increased interest, the expansion, the commercialization in this area, some I think of the meaning and the precision has been lost, and with that, the effectiveness. So today I want to talk about what I believe mindfulness is and isn't, and how equanimity is a central part of our understanding of mindfulness and the desired outcomes that we hope to achieve through mindfulness. It's really a means to an end rather than an outcome. Most of us have heard some definitions of mindfulness. One of the better ones being that of mindfulness involves paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. That's Kabat-Zinn, who was one of those people who developed mindfulness as a therapy, particularly for pain, after undertaking Vipassana training back in the 60s when he was a young man. But the trouble with attempting to provide simple definitions really is that some things get lost, and some of the mindfulness of process may have lost some of the power of what we're trying to do. So certainly there's a move to talk about mindfulness as just paying attention, and there's a lot of focus on improving your attention, being more effective in the workplace, getting more of what you want, the kind of corporatization of mindfulness. The problem is that this really suggests that anything goes, from paying attention to flowers in the backyard to paying attention to coloring books or apps for mindfulness, which may be just really a form of engagement in relaxation, leading to temporary relaxation at best, and sometimes even snoring festivals, which of course may be deeply relaxing and pleasant, but not mindfulness. If attention alone is what makes mindfulness, then a cat waiting patiently and attending fully to the mouse ready to jump on it and kill it would be mindful, or a sniper with a gun aiming at its target ready to kill it would be mindful. So it seems like there are other factors that we need to consider, and one of those is ethics. Traditional teaching includes the requirement of ethical practice, of doing no harm to self or other, as a prerequisite before you even begin to practice. And if we're practicing hard with a desire to achieve at a cost of others, then practice will be limited. Hence my kind of ambivalence or hesitation with more corporate mindfulness approaches. But we do know that mindfulness is important, and we know that attention in mindfulness is important. But attention needs to be trained in a very specific way to observe the experience with the mind of the mind of the body in an unbiased and a more impersonal way. So mindfulness is really a tool of self-investigation. In fact, Vipassana meditation, which is the traditional school of meditation, which I utilize in MICBT, is an insight meditation. It's about developing insight into the self. We observe the mind and the body whilst learning to be free from reactivity to experiences that arise and pass away. So we train our mind to witness thoughts and physical sensations mindfully in terms of this transient and impersonal phenomena. So impermanence, that things arise and pass away through our practice. And we'll demonstrate some of this hopefully as we go into this session. In this way, though, when we practice, we start to realize that both troubles in the past, troubles in the present, are of an impermanent nature, as all things are, and therefore we don't really need to dwell on them. And concerns about an imagined future, which of course may never happen, serves little purpose. So in what we're trying to do when we practice mindfulness is deliberately train the mind to withdraw attention from these mental experiences, these worries, these troubles, where the mind tends to go, so that we can prevent rumination and catastrophizing and some of the dissatisfactions that feed what the Buddhist term of is suffering, our suffering. And it seems to me that these skills are very important, and particularly at times where we're facing uncertainty and loss and impermanence and change and all of the things that we find very unsettling and stressful and distressing. So to be able to develop some skills at this time is going to be very useful. So why do we need to practice though? Why not an app? Why not just a coloring book? Why not something, the concept of mindfulness? Just thinking thoughts are just thoughts. Perhaps that's enough. Well, mindfulness relies on experiential learning, really, rather than theoretical learning. And we need to acquire knowledge through a heightened experiential awareness of present moment, free from reactivity and free from identification with the experience. So we practice as the observer of our own mental and physical experiences. And as I said, mindfulness is seen as a means to an end, a tool of investigation of a more objective reality rather than the subject one that our mind generates. And it involves some components, sustained attention, yes, but with an attitude of objectivity, of not without craving, without wishing harm, without generating an outcome. A non-identification, meaning observing objectively what goes on really without us. Our breath takes place without us, our heart beats without us. We can just observe it rather than be making things happen. And thirdly, equanimity, which I'll talk about more as we go on, the ability to be unperturbed by the experiences within the mind and the body. But of course, there's no quick fix to achieve all of these. There's no tablet, there's no injection, there's no really app that can do this without concerted practice. Like everything, when we learn a new skill, when we retrain our brain, then we're actually using neuroplasticity. We're acquiring new skills that demand tremendous abilities and practice. But as a consequence of this concerted practice, we become more mindful and more equanimous. Being more equanimous means that our emotional reactivity decreases. Gradually, we're able to sit for longer without reacting to thoughts and sensations associated with craving. Either I want more of it, that was nice, I was in a lovely daydream, I'd like more, or I don't like this pain in my leg because I've been sitting, I want to get rid of it, so I'll get up and forget my practice. We just simply sit and observe those things, those transient experiences. So where we would normally find ourselves kind of tangled in this proliferation of thoughts and worries, instead an equanimous mind becomes increasingly unperturbed by these experiences within the framework of the mind and body. So it's a wonderful, we're not two separate beings. In academia, sometimes we feel like we're just mind and the body seems to disappear, but we're both. And whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, we just observe them in the same way without judgment. So when an unpleasant experience or thought arises, normally our strategy would be one of distraction, avoiding unpleasant bodily cues. You know, we get back on the computer, we do all the things that we do, we overeat, we undereat, we overexercise, we underexercise, we watch too much TV, we shout, we argue, we harm ourselves, we drink, we take drugs. You know, all of these activities are ways of not really feeling what's within the body and mind. But during mindfulness meditation, the instructions are to sit immobile, in silence, with eyes closed. So not stimulating any sense of sight, touch, taste, smell that we normally use to distract us, and preventing this thinking, this automatic thinking, by just coming back to the object of our meditation. And when we practice, we're going to be talking about the breath, but it can be other aspects that we focus on. So not distracting ourselves, not avoiding, but just simply observing the experience as it is, not how we want it to be, just as it is. When we practice, it's hard to remember to be mindful because the mind takes us off, of course, into memories, into the past, into the future. We're very rarely in the present where the mind is where we want it to be. I'm sure in the last 15 minutes or so, your mind has gone elsewhere, numerous times perhaps. Very hard to keep it where you want it to be. So of course, the mind takes us off, it hijacks us over and over and over. But as a consequence of accurate and regular mindfulness, practice is that the mind gradually starts to automatically utilize these new habits. And I stress accurate because there's a lot of precision in the instructions. When we come to the section where I'll take you through a practice, what you'll hopefully be able to see is that the instructions are very precise. We're really needing to do this practice in such a way that we get it absolutely right. Otherwise, if we practice mindfulness and we sit on a cushion daydreaming for an hour, all we're doing is really strengthening our capacity to daydream. And while daydreaming is pleasant, the same parts of the brain are involved in rumination and worry and some of the things that cause us tremendous distress. So we need to be able to focus and control the mind, to tether the mind to some extent. And that's what we'll talk about, to develop these new habits. And habits, regular practice, we're at a very interesting time. And it's a time when hopefully some of us are working harder than we were. Some of us maybe working a bit less. We may have more time or more flexibility. So now is a very good time in this kind of feeling of being rather lost at sea and untethered to our normal routine, to develop some routine practice. So I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of this talk, about what might be helpful getting going with some regular practice. Okay, so how do we operationalize mindfulness? All these wonderful things that we can achieve, but how do we do it? So in MICBT, we've applied and 3 different kinds of meditation, and each actually develop in their level of skill. But the first kind of meditation, which is a concentration on breath, mindfulness of breath, is common to most kinds of meditation practice. It requires attention regulation, training our attention on the breath to stay on our breath, and different meditation styles use different kinds of breath. So it might be the nostrils or the nose or the stomach or whatever target that is. But it's an ability to train sustained attention on a target with a kind of metacognitive awareness. We talk an awareness of being able to observe that process taking place rather than being simply in it. With inhibitory control, meaning that we inhibit what we would normally do, which is to get distracted and mind wander again. We inhibit that and bring our attention back. And an ability to increase our attention switching by withdrawing attention from the thoughts we're lost in and bringing it back to our target. And I'll talk you through this and make it more practical shortly. But of course, the benefits of this sustained attention, bringing our attention back to a target, preventing ourselves from getting lost in thoughts, is that we decrease the degree to which we're distractible from these irrelevant thoughts, sensory stimuli, and we create a more focused mind, I guess. In most meditation practices, we do this for the purpose actually of moving into other forms of meditation. So it's a kind of first step, preparing the mind for further forms of meditation, but in and of itself, it gives a tremendous strength and is, and some people practice just mindfulness of breath. I certainly recommend that it's a first step in. In MICBT, we move on after we've developed some ability to keep the mind where we want it to be, in this case, in noticing sensations of the breath in the nostrils. We then move on and apply that same focus to a systematic scanning of the body. So paying attention to sensation throughout the body, part by part, in order to develop equanimity, that ability to not react, through that exposure to all of the sensations that we experience within the body, whether that's anger, hunger, pain, agitation, boredom, all of which are felt in the body, and we go in and discover those. But instead of reacting to them as we would normally do, we simply observe, which gives us a tremendous freedom in being able to observe but not react to our experiences outside of practice, off the mat, if you like, or off the cushion. The general aims of using these techniques, along with later some loving kindness training, is to develop, as I said, insight or a greater self-awareness, an objectivity, an acceptance. So we have a kind attitude, it's not a striving like you might in the gym, got to do better. That will only cause further problems. It's a kind, accepting attitude to just keeping going over and over with the same practice. In MICBT, we add on at that later stage in practice, empathic training, and this includes self-compassion achieved and compassion for others achieved by loving kindness meditations, or what I call grounded empathy training meditations, where our awareness of the body can be utilized to experience pleasant sensations based on our good wishes towards ourselves and others. So we start to actually train ourselves to get a reward really for pleasant and kind or empathic thoughts towards others and ourselves. And this is better done when we've really got an awareness of sensation, so we can really feel it and experience it fully, rather than it be a kind of purely theoretical or kind of cognitive idea. So let's just try now a brief practice, and then I'll introduce a longer practice. You don't need any special equipment for this. An office chair will be adequate. I'll talk more before we come into the full practice, but some people like to sit with their knees sit on the floor on a cushion, cross-legged. If they're comfortable to do that for a length of time, that's absolutely fine, but it's not required. Sitting upright, though, is required. If we lie down, if we lie on nice cushions or relaxing chairs, whilst that will be very pleasant, it's very likely to produce sleep. We live in such active times that we associate, busyness with having our eyes open. And when we close our eyes, now it must be sleep time. So at first we can find ourselves getting very drowsy as soon as we try to meditate because we've closed our eyes. We're telling our brain it's sleep time. This can very quickly be counteracted by simply just sitting up straight, not being supported, but actually putting some effort in sitting. So I would recommend just sitting on a normal chair, but making sure that your buttocks are just a little bit above your knees so that your knees are just a little slanted downwards, because that keeps the back straight and you can do no harm. You might experience some discomfort, but no harm. So when you find yourself a decent position that you think is okay, I'll just take you through a very brief exercise that hopefully explains a few things about mindfulness of breath. What I'm going to ask you to do is, when you're ready, just close your eyes and just follow my instructions. Just sitting with your back straight, your neck straight, in a reasonably comfortable and upright position. I want you to just take your attention to your breath, particularly the breath coming in and out of your nostrils. So your nostrils and the sensation of breath coming in and out of the nostrils is your focus of attention. And what I'd like you to do is notice whenever a thought takes your attention elsewhere, raise one of the fingers on either hand. And as soon as you can bring your attention back to the breath in the nostrils, let the finger go down. So your only instruction is to focus your attention on the breath coming in and out of your nostrils. But as your attention is taken elsewhere, raise a finger. As soon as you can bring it back, let the finger go down. We'll just practice that for just 2 minutes, eyes closed. And when you're ready, open your eyes. So that was a very brief practice. And I imagine that you may have noticed some thoughts, perhaps many thoughts. When I work with clients, occasionally people say they don't really have thoughts. Well, probably they now realize they do. That we have a lot of thoughts, and that even just for a few minutes, it can be quite challenging to stay with one's attention on the breath and the nose as the target for that. You might already notice patterns of thoughts that get activated in the mind. We tend to think thoughts about something that's just happened with recency effect. Those neural pathways in the brain are still lit up. You might find that you have thoughts that are the usual thoughts, frequency effect, where thoughts have got well-trodden pathways in a way in the brain, and therefore we think them because we think them. They're very regular kind of thoughts. And you may find that thoughts arise because they're the most salient. There's a fight for attention as to what comes to our attention in the mind, and a perpetual jostling to get to the front of our attention. And so the most salient thing tends to jump in. So if the door bangs, that's what brings our attention to it. If we have a memory that's very significant, our attention comes to that. If we're frightened by something, our attention comes to that. If we have some pain in the body, our attention comes to that. So whatever is most salient tends to come up. So we can start to notice these patterns of thoughts. One thing to remember is that mindfulness is not about having no thoughts or an empty mind. And I think that's been misleading for some people, because they experience this practice and they have lots of thoughts, and they become aware that there are lots of intrusive thoughts. And therefore, how could I possibly empty my mind? Well, that's not possible. No one ever does that. If they do, I think they're probably dead. But we become aware of how intrusive thoughts are in order for us to then start to shape our attention so that we can develop a skill at gradually withdrawing attention from them, keeping our focus on where we want it to be, where we choose it to be. And in this case, it's the breath. So an analogy is that we're tethering our kind of wild horse mind, tethering it with a string back to our breath, and that it will reach out and try and find different ways and places to go, but we bring it back with that tether back to the breath, over and over again. One way of looking at it is in terms of three components. The first is that we recognize that our mind has gone elsewhere. The second is that we manage to bring our mind away from the thought that's hijacked us. And the third is that we bring it back to the breath. So you might, like when we practice shortly, to think about recognizing a thought, becoming aware that the mind has gone there, is no longer on the breath, bringing the mind away from that, and then bringing it back to the breath, over and over, until we become stronger at pulling the mind back over and over again. So I'm going to introduce now a longer practice. I'm going to shut my window because there's a lot of sound coming in. So have a moment now to find a comfortable position. This is about 20 minutes for this practice. The reason why we start a practice with no less than 20 minutes is because the mind can sometimes take quite a long time to settle into a practice. And towards the end, we can also find that we lose our attention. And so in order to have a concerted part of the practice that has the power in it, Really anything under that can be, it's not optimal. But of course, we have to take the middle path. So something is better than nothing. But I encourage you, if you start to practice, 20 minutes would be a good starting point. If you need to practice in less time, try to build up. When I work with clients, we start at half an hour twice a day. So really, you know, working quite hard. But that's because there's often some things that really need to change and shift fast, and therefore it's really important that the person gets going and practices with a real determination. And remember that mindfulness is also not relaxation, although there may be tremendous benefits in terms of deeper equanimity, calm, all sorts of things will benefit us, but that it's not designed to be a relaxation exercise, because sometimes practice can be challenging. There's some discomfort, some boredom, agitation, some you know, things arise during practice, as they do in life, no more than they do in life, but that we are developing a skill at being able to manage them differently, and that will result in greater calm, a slowing down of the mind in a way that's helpful to increase clarity and so on. But if we go in with an expectation, as I've worked with sometimes people, and they say, but that wasn't very, you know, it wasn't pleasant, it wasn't relaxing, and it's important that it's clarified that it's not a relaxation practice per se. And although relaxation can make us feel it's a very pleasant experience for most, not all, after we finish it, it may have little effect on improving our lives outside of the practice. So whilst I enjoy relaxation myself, we're looking at something that will achieve greater and longer and more global change, which is why that we practice with this method. So when you're ready, let's start a practice. So find your comfortable sitting position, either cross-legged on the floor, or if you're used to, you know, if you're used to sitting in that way, or if not, then on a chair. Try not to lean against the back of the chair. Your knees should be lower than your buttocks, so that you need to sit on top of one or more cushions. That's fine. And your neck and your back need to be straight, neck straight, back straight, comfortable seat. And when you're ready, close your eyes. And as before, focus all your attention at the entrance of your nostrils. And be aware of the breath coming in and going out. Simple breath, non-controlled breath, natural breath. Breath as you need to breathe without controlling the breath. It may be the first time you've noticed the breath for a while, but there it is, going on without us. If the air in your environment is warm or cold, you might feel temperature in the air as it touches the outer ring or the inner walls of the nostrils. You may not. That's okay. Simply be aware the air is flowing continuously at the entrance of your nostrils, in and out. Notice if it comes more through the left or the right nostril. Notice if it's deep or shallow, fast or slow. Make no effort to change it, just witness it as it is. When you're aware of the incoming and outgoing breath, there's no past or future. You're in the present moment, from moment to moment. Time almost doesn't exist. Just present with the breath. Your mind's not used to staying in the present moment. It's used to wandering in the past, wandering in the future, but very rarely staying in the present moment. There are reasons why this occurs. When parts of the brain are constantly activated by habit, because there's memory that's more or less stressful, the strength of this activation in the brain is such that we tend to repeat the thought or the memory. And because of this repetition, these pathways in the brain are facilitated, and thoughts related to these pathways just keep on intruding. They keep on intruding over and over again until you stop nurturing them by not thinking them, not feeding them with your attention. So your big challenge during this exercise is to withdraw your attention from an ongoing thought, understanding that it is just a thought. Keep breathing consciously, very alert, very attentive. Every time a thought arises, see it for what it is. Just a thought, not the truth, not you. There may be some true issues within the thought, but the thought is just a thought, a mental experience. Learn to see thoughts for what they are. Practice now for a few minutes to see thoughts for what they are without reacting or engaging with them, without identifying yourself with them, with a degree of detachment as an observer. And keep watching and observing the incoming and outgoing breath as it comes in and it goes out. Keep on focusing steadily on the in and the outgoing breath. Noticing any sensations in the nostrils, around the nostrils, temperature, movement. Try to sustain your attention towards your breath for as long as you can. There's no need to use any strategy in the mind or count or anything like that. Because then you'd end up focusing on the strategy and forget about the breath. You might start saying 1, 2, 1, 2, in and out, and forget all about what you're actually doing, which is to just observe what actually happens rather than thinking about what happens. Learn about your mind by focusing on your breath from moment to moment without judging, evaluating, changing, or reacting to the experience in any way. Keep practicing. The longer you practice, the more changes you'll notice in your daily activities. You may be able to focus better, gain time, be less bothered by intrusive thoughts, and develop a degree of self-confidence and self-control. Keep practicing steadily, focusing on your incoming and outgoing breath. You may feel sensations, movement, temperature, itching, anything at all, or you may feel no sensations, doesn't matter. Just keep your mind on the breath. Every time your mind wanders, don't be disappointed or defeated. Bring it back smilingly, kindly, to the awareness of respiration, observing the breath constantly, every breath, as it arises, as it passes away, as it arises, as it passes away. Awareness of respiration at the entrance of the nostrils, within the nostrils. Keep on developing your awareness of the breath, mastering your own mind bit by bit, progressively, practicing confidently. You may be able to feel sensation of cold on the inner walls of the nostrils as you breathe in. Maybe sensation of warmth on the nostrils as you breathe out. Maybe a subtle sensation of air touching the skin below the nostrils, above the top lip. If you don't feel anything, breathe slightly harder just for a few moments, just to feel the touch of the breath. And then quickly come back to normal breathing, natural breathing. Remember, we're not trying to regulate the breath, we're just observing and accepting it as it is. Sometimes your mind will wander because it doesn't like to stay in the present moment. It's not used to it. It'll wander either into the past or into the future. Bring it back to the present moment, smilingly. Each time it wanders, gently bring it back to the awareness of respiration. Keep on focusing on the in and outgoing breath, trying to sustain your attention for as long as you can. Keep breathing consciously, very alert, very attentive. Every time a thought arises, see it for what it is, just a thought, in the present moment, from moment to moment. You may already feel sensations somewhere in the nose, the face, or elsewhere in the body. This is normal. Absolutely normal, whether unpleasant or pleasant. The more relaxed you are, the more sensitive your processes become, because you're not distracted. Just bring the mind back to the breath, focusing consciously on the in and outgoing breath for as long as you can. The more you practice, the more benefits you will gain. Take another 2 or 3 breaths. Prepare yourself to open your eyes. And when you're ready, open the eyes, come back into the room where you are. And now you've completed your practice. Well done. There may be a number of questions that arise after this practice. I wanted to just perhaps cover 1 or 2. When we first start to practice mindfulness of breath, because we're becoming aware of these internal processes, as our awareness increases, we can become aware of just how mindless or distracted we are. And interestingly, when people measure mindfulness, they find that sometimes people's mindfulness scores go down with practice, which is probably a function of them becoming more aware of how distracted the mind is. And so it's a kind of effect. But with practice, one starts to, again, get some control, to be a master of our own mind to some extent. But you can see how we may need to be very gentle and kind to ourselves, as when we get frustrated or cross with ourselves, that builds agitation. It makes the practice more unpleasant, and we can find ourselves in a fight with it. There are lots of experiences that one can have: drowsiness, boredom, agitation, doubts, being lost in thought. All of the above are issues that arise and that can be addressed. I'm going to just leave a few minutes for questions at the end in case anyone has any urgent questions that they feel, but I'm also going to give you some information that you might want to follow up if you're interested about these methods. And of course, I can be contacted if there's anything that people want to know. These are difficult and challenging times, but they are also an opportunity to develop some of these lifelong skills. And I would certainly recommend daily practice, regular practice, in order to really strengthen these muscles of the mind, if you like, to be able to achieve some of the things that we would hope for. Practice can be done through self-help, or you can make contact with organization that provides mindfulness-integrated therapies. The UTS Psychology Clinic, which unfortunately is closed currently, does offer mindfulness-integrated therapy, which involves a development of really quite advanced meditation practice alongside some other things. The MICBT Institute of Australia has information, and also Open Ground, a slightly different meditation technique, but very similar. And indeed, your local Buddhist center or meditation center, these are often free or very low cost. One of the interesting things about meditation being taken out of its Buddhist context is that it may well have lost some of its important ethical components. One of which is that teaching meditation and these wonderful skills should be given freely. Now, of course, that's not always possible, but my view is that it shouldn't be mixed with making a profit. So often the highly respected centers for meditation are free or very low cost. I will provide some references and suggestions. I do recommend avoiding apps that make great promises with little practice involved, or corporate money-making schemes. As I said, traditionally teaching should be given freely or as close as that as possible, and money shouldn't be the primary goal of the teacher. I'm giving some references. The first one is a self-help book written by my colleague Bruno, who developed Mindfulness-integrated CBT and whose script I was just using. On that site, there are MP3 and CDs at very low cost that have a number of increasing meditation scripts that are extremely useful. But I've given the link for also Open Ground in Sydney, which offers meditation, and the Dharma organization that offers 10-day silent retreats at no cost at all. For clinicians, if there are clinicians amongst you, I can recommend the Clinician's Guide to MICBT, which is a step-by-step workbook resource for therapists, and I'll give the reference for that as well. I hope that this has been useful. We've got about 4 minutes just left for questions if anyone has any. Hold on. If anyone had a question, they can speak now.
Catherine's got a question, Alice. She says, thank you. I do have a question. Does it matter what time or when to conduct mindfulness practice, like morning or afternoon?
So in traditional teaching, it's recommended that 2 kind of ends of the day, morning, first thing in the morning, towards the end of the day, in order perhaps, I mean, there are lots of different reasons why that might be, but practically one of them is that our mind is in a very different sort of state early in the morning and in the evening. So if you only practice, say, in the morning, when your mind is very buzzy about the day ahead, you may develop tremendous skills to manage that. And yet in the evening, when you might be perhaps tired or might be more stressed or whatever it might be, you're not developing skills to manage that. So providing ourselves with opportunities for two different times of the day allows us to practice to develop equanimity in relation to different mental experiences and states of body and mind. But the long-term kind of recipe is, in Vipassana training, it's an hour a day, or actually no, it's an hour twice a day. For MICBT, we recommend about 45 minutes once a day, because that seems to be more feasible. But elongating the practice means that people really strengthen the skills in equanimity, and they can develop their practice further. So it's often difficult to find the space, the place to practice without too much interruption. Try not to be too precious about that, because life does have noises and distractions. They can be useful tools for focusing. But if we try and practice on trains and with the radio going, it's going to make our practice so difficult. So it is worth thinking about where you can practice and at different times of the day. And there are some wonderful things actually online at the moment. Lots of people are providing free webinars and meditation practices and so on. So it is a great time to try these things out as well. Hopefully that answers that. Anything else?
We've got another question, Alice, from Elena. She says, thank you for a great introduction to mindfulness. I just wondered how, if you equate or relate mindfulness to the concept of Zen.
So there are lots of parallels, of course, and Buddhist, whether we practice Vipassana or other forms of meditation, the central source, if we go back into lineage, may come from the same flow. So there's often lots of similarities, but some form of meditation. So there are meditations that focus on a particular concept. There's focusing on a particular visual image in some way. There are many different forms of practice, all of which share some common denominators, but there's I don't want to get into sort of comparing and contrasting the different methods, but try some and to see what suits you. But generally speaking, their mindfulness of breath or some kind of focused attention will be a preliminary practice for most forms of meditation, in order to get some control over the mind, to then be able to apply in whichever technique the person wants to go on to. Okay, any further questions?
We've got another one from Harriet. She says, thank you for such an interesting session. I'm just wondering if there is a particular goal or way you should ideally feel after practice. I found myself feeling quite overwhelmed, a bit of sensory overload when I first opened my eyes when I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, so there are lots of different experiences within practice, and we can experience some sensations and things that we're not used to, because we're so used to using the senses to fill up our mind with sights and smells and so on. We very rarely actually go inside and perceive our experiences, and sometimes they can be unusual. The main thing is that there are all sorts of things that can occur, all sorts of sensations arise, they quickly pass, they're transient, and that we try not to judge them. But while the mind's had a bit of a rest from all those senses, where we've deliberately deprived it of that for the purposes of looking inwards, then of course, when we stop practice, things can seem more vibrant, and that's, you know, and different to some extent. But when I'm working with people, I try to really reassure that all of these experiences arise and pass away and change, and that we don't want to get too attach to them or think too much about them. They change and they change and they change and they change. And that the idea is to just simply observe without any judgment and so on. But yes, sometimes practice is hard. Sometimes practice can feel unpleasant. You know, certainly if you're practicing for long times, aches and pains will be felt, and they can become a tremendous tool to develop equanimity by not reacting to them, not needing to do anything as long as we know the body's safe in a position that's safe.